Should be for Shalema for Yona Ben Rachel Dvorah, who's not doing well in the hospital with the virus. Should be for Shalema, so Shachol Yisrael Karov, Mir Hashem. Okay, so we're going to start tonight. We'll see how many weeks we'll go for. But I want to speak for a few weeks about all different halachos about being outside on Shabbos. There's so many malachos that have to do with vegetation and plants and watering, all sorts of things like that we only encounter when we spend time outside. In the olden days, when people used to live in a much more agricultural type of a society, and everything was with machines and mechanized everything. So a lot of these malachos and halachos were much more well known and commonly put into practice because people lived that way. Their lives interacted with the outdoors a lot more dependently than they do nowadays. But now, especially in the summer times, we spend time outside, and especially the kids and stuff like that playing. So I wanted to speak about just all sorts of common halachos that come up on Hilchos Shabbos, specifically about being outside. Now the main cover a variety of things. Hilchos Muktzah is going to come up in different ways, and certain malachos that come in. But the main malacha that has to do that we're going to be speaking about tonight is the malacha of kotzer. Kotzer is a malacha of when you cut something off that's growing, picking a fruit off of a tree, breaking a branch off of a bush. Anytime that you're plucking a blade of grass, anytime that you're removing something that it's growing from, that's a malacha of kotzer. When it's connected to the ground, as opposed to the same thing. If you would do it to something that was living, would be gozes. In other words, if you trimming a bonsai tree, would be kotzer. Trimming a beard is gozes, right? That's how the living animal. The truth is, a bonsai tree wouldn't be kotzer. It could be there's also anything that you do that encourages growth. Is also a malacha on Shabbos. It has to do with the malacha of planting, the malacha of zoreah. But anything that you do, not just planting a seed or putting in water, which we'll talk about maybe later or next week, but anything that you do that helps a plant grow or a tree grow is also a malacha of zoreah. It's called zomer, pruning. So if you're cutting a tree, you're breaking a tree in order to help it grow more, in order to encourage it to grow. So that's going to be that's also malacha. But usually that's not that's not what comes up. So the malacha of kotzer on Shabbos, again, anytime that you break something off of something that's growing outside. So because that's something that is done very easily. A person just breaking something off with their hand as they're walking or as they're doing something. So there's a number of things that Chazal prohibited as a gzeira that you may come to do kotzer, that you may come to break off a branch. An interesting one, which doesn't really come up so much for us nowadays, but riding a horse. The reason that you're not allowed to ride a horse on Shabbos is because it was very normal back in the olden days when you're riding a horse to break off a branch in order to give the horse a little bit of a patch to tell him to go or whatever. Yeah. So because that's something that a person does just as a matter of course, as a matter of habit, and they don't know to pay attention to themselves. So the halacha is you're not allowed to ride a horse on Shabbos because you may come and break off. That doesn't come up so much with us. But because of this, the same thing of Chazal prohibiting something because you may come to do kotzer, there's a lot of things that we're not allowed to do interacting with trees and bushes and plants on Shabbos because of this malacha of kotzer. There's all sorts of gezeras that have to do with trees, not climbing in trees, not putting things in trees, not taking things down from trees, not leaning on trees, and all these things. And they all revolve around this malacha of kotzer, even though really none of them actually involve the act of kotzer anymore. Nothing's involved breaking or cutting anything off. But because these are all gezeras midrabanan that were enacted to protect the malacha of kotzer, so we'll talk about them. We'll talk about them here together. So the first one we'll talk about, the Shulchan Aruch writes, ein ogen be'ilan, that you're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to climb trees, and that's the halacha. Children, you don't have to stop them. Children who do malacha on Shabbos anyway. The kids who are playing outside with sticks and stones, if they want to climb up on a tree, so you don't have to stop them until they get to the age that you have to stop children from doing malacha on Shabbos. Whatever the age is when they're higiyah l'chinuch, when they get to the stage that they can understand. So once you start telling them not to scribble on Shabbos and not to pick up rocks and not to break things, so then also you tell them not to climb trees. But for an adult, to climb a tree is also. Now, not that most of us find ourselves climbing trees so frequently, but let's say you wanted to get something that was high up. Something, let's say you have a ledge outside or something fell out of a window upstairs, and the way to do it would be to hold onto the tree and hoist yourself up onto the trees. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to climb up onto the tree. And then, in fact, there's a whole sugya which we're not going to learn through now, but all the halachos, if you went up there, are you allowed to climb down? You're not allowed to climb down, but if you went up there from Erev Shabbos, you're allowed to climb down. But that's, we're joking about it. But just tonight, I was speaking with Chavrusa before davening before this year. And I said to him, I'm going to be giving shiurim on these halachos tonight. Do you have any halachos, anything interesting that you ever heard about it? So he said that he has a kid, was a kid who one time climbed a tree, and then when he was up in the tree, somebody told him, hey, you're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. And then the kid got very upset because he didn't know that, and he was 9 years old, 10, whatever it was, and so the person said just climb down, and he said that he refused to climb down until the person went to his house and asked him, meaning his father, Bacharusa, and said, is it mutter for him to climb down off the tree? And he told him yes, it is, and that's it. But the halacha is it's only mutter to climb down. If a person went up there b'shogeg, by accident, the halacha is Allah b'ilan b'Shabbos. If a person went up on a tree on Shabbos, b'mezid asur leirei, they have to stay up there all Shabbos. They have to stay there. It's a takana from Chazal to kind of punish them for climbing into the tree. But anyway, most of the time it's mutter if a person is stuck up in a tree. A kid who climbs up, they can come down. Anyway, but so you're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. That's that. But it's not only that. Shulchan Aruch continues. Ve'ein b'shtamshin b'mechuber lekarka klal. Not only are we not allowed to climb a tree, but we're not allowed to be mishtamesh. We're not allowed to use anything that's mechuber to the ground at all. Anything that's rooted, connected into the ground, mushrash into the ground. So there's an iser of hishtamshus. You're not allowed to use it. Now, what does it mean to use it? So there's a whole list of things now that are included that the Shulchan Aruch goes through that are included in using a tree. So we'll go through these things and we'll discuss the halachos of each one of them. But basically, I wrote it down into a list here. I'll just give the list first, and then we'll go into each one and explain a little bit more. But using a tree, once we explain the criteria, is going to include leaning on it, putting something on it, taking something off of it, even putting something on or off of a hook that's on a tree, or leaning something on a tree. All of those things are going to be asur to do. Right? Any again, hishtamshus to the tree, leaning on it, putting something on it, using the tree. What's interesting is a big shaila in the poskim: are you allowed to wipe your hands off on a tree? Let's say your hands get dirty. Excuse me, 1 second. The person's outside. Your hands get dirty or something. There's just something on your hand. So you're allowed to wipe your hand off on a tree in order to clean off your hand. So there's actually a big shaila in the poskim about this. Is a big difference of opinion whether wiping off your hand is considered to be a hishtamshus. Is that considered to be using something? My Rosh Kol in Chicago, Rabbi Zucker, was a very chashav Talmud Chacham, very big posik in the Shabbos. So he brought a very beautiful proof to this, that it's permissible. It's permissible to do it. In other words, if your hands get dirty on Shabbos, you're allowed to wipe them off on a tree or on a branch or something. The reason is because the halacha is you're not allowed to use an animal either. You're not allowed to lean on an animal or put something up on an animal, but the halacha is clear. You're allowed to wipe your hand on a tail of a sus. Right? You're allowed to wipe off your hands on a horse's tail. So he says, you see from there that wiping your hands off on something clean, that's not considered being mishtamesh. That's not like shimush chashuv. That's not considered to be a significant use. It's just like cleaning something off. So that is mutter to do if you need to. But leaning on a tree or putting anything onto a tree, so that's going to be problematic. So let's just go and explain some of these things. What it is that we're talking about. So first of all, leaning, as it sounds, you're not allowed to do. In halacha, leaning is defined as if the thing would be moved away, would I fall? Now that's always in halacha. What's in any time that you need to stand, there'll be halacha. Let's say for Shmona Esrei, where you need to stand during Birchas Kohanim, when the Kohanim are giving the brachos. Any time the halacha requires that you stand, so the halacha is lichatchila, the best thing is to stand completely without leaning on anything at all. But if you're leaning gently on something, you're leaning forward, like a lot of people do when they daven, they'll lean a little bit forward like this. So if you're leaning to the extent that if the object would disappear, you would still be standing, that's considered standing. But if it's so much that if the object would disappear, you would just fall down, so then it's not considered standing anymore. So the same thing is true when it comes to a tree. To kind of stand next to a tree, or to maybe rest my elbow against a tree, or put my foot up against a tree, or something when I'm standing, so that would be permissible to do. But if I'm leaning against a tree, that I'm like putting my weight on it, to the extent that if the tree would disappear, I would stumble backwards. That's already also to do. That's already prohibited. Now, all of these halachos are only aser. Maybe I should have said this in the beginning, but I'm just picturing in terms of leaning, where a person leans. It's only aser once it's 3 tfachim off of the ground. About 10 inches, or a foot, or say, off of the ground. Let's say like this much off of the ground. In other words, sitting against the root of a tree, or sitting on roots of a tree that are like bumping up on the ground. Or like I said, sitting on the floor and leaning your lower back, let's say, against the tree, that would be permissible. It only becomes aser once it gets above 3 tfachim off the ground. Once it's already like at a height where you would use the tree at that height. If it's below 3 tfachim, that's already considered like part of the ground. It's like buttle to the ground. That's not a part of the tree already. But once you're talking about branches that are higher, or parts of the tree that are higher already, so you're already not allowed to lean, or do any of these things. Now, in addition to leaning physically myself, I'm not allowed to lean an object against the tree either. I wouldn't be able to take let's say I have a stack of folding chairs. Let's say we had a kiddush outside, we had a shir outside, and I want to pack away the chairs. And so you fold up all the chairs, then you lean them against something until you get them to take them away. So you're not allowed to do that up against the tree because the leaning on a tree is considered hishtamshus. That's considered using it, whether it's my body that's leaning against it or an item, or you have a folding table that you fold up and you want to put down somewhere, or something along those lines. So you're not allowed to lean up anything against the tree. Now, not only that, but you can't put something onto a tree. Now, just to make sure that we're picturing in our mind the right scenario, we're not just talking about trees, we're talking bushes also, anything that's growing up from the ground, that has branches and foliage, vegetation, anything like that is what we're referring to. So you're not allowed to put something onto a tree or onto bushes on Shabbos. Let's say you have a towel or something, and you want, or one of your kids, let's say your kid's outside and he's hot, he wants to take off his his shirt and run around in his undershirt and tzitzis. So you can't just take his shirt and drape it on the bush, which you would do during the week, just like to put it down somewhere or hang it on a tree branch. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. And not only that, you can't take something off of a tree or a bush or a branch on Shabbos if it was there from before. If something was put there on Shabbos, it shouldn't have been done, and you're not allowed to take it off. But even if something was up there from before Shabbos, you're not allowed to take it off. Because that's also called using a tree. But just the act of removing it, so it's as if the tree is like, serving me this item. What's interesting about this halacha...
Even if it's something that you need? Like if it's something that would have it...
We'll see in a second. I'm saying what the post will say, if a person's walking and their yarmulke flies up and lands in a tree, so then there's a shayla that also post really, you should really try to get a non-Jew to get it down. But in a case like that where it's like a shasat chak and a person would be stuck, but let's say a case which comes up a lot, let's say kids are playing with a ball or a frisbee or something and it gets stuck in the branches. So again, if it's in a bush and it's low down to the ground, then it's fine. Like having to go into the branches and pull it out. But if it lands up high on the bush, or it lands up in the trees, you're not allowed to take it down on Shabbos. And the poskim say even to throw something else at it, to knock it down, you're not allowed to do. Again, to let the kids do it is fine, because the kids, anything they do is fine out there. But you're not allowed to take it down from the tree. Again, even if it was put there beheter, or even if it was put there accidentally, so much so that there's a special gzeira that the Gemara speaks about. Again, Shulchan Aruch, there's a gzeira that something that you're going to need on Shabbos, you're not allowed to leave hanging in a tree going into Shabbos. So let's say that case of a towel. Let's say you have, let's say like a little table or whatever, chairs outside, So before Shabbos, Friday afternoon, you were there. You had a towel. You just draped the towel there on some branches or hung it on a branch. So you have to take it down before Shabbos, because since it's very matzui, it's very likely that on Shabbos you're going to go over and need that towel or want to use that towel. So anything that you would normally end up needing to use on Shabbos, you're mechuyev to take down from before Shabbos. You're not allowed to leave it up there. So I asked once, you're not mechuyev to do b'tikas chametz and go around outside and look in all the places and make sure nothing's hanging up. But if you know that there's something outside that's hanging on the trees, you have to make sure you take it down before Shabbos. Let's say your kids have toys or something that they play with, something. You have to make sure that it's that it's taken down. What's interesting, I was going to just point out about this, that Rosh Zalman Auerbach, Zechron Levracha, he points out a very interesting thing. He says, you see from this halacha that you could have thought, perhaps, that taking something off of another object is not considered using that object. I hear putting food on a plate, putting something onto a tree, that I'm using it, but taking something off, I could have heard is not, but he said you see from this halacha that it is. You see that just removing it is prohibited. So he says you see from here that when it comes to the halacha of tevilas kelim, when it comes to the halacha of taking kelim to the mikvah, you have to bring metal kelim, glass, whatever. You have to take it to the mikvah before you use it. So there's a question in the poskim. Let's say somebody didn't let's say I'm visiting somebody's home, another Jewish person, and they don't know the halacha, and they didn't tovel this plate. So am I allowed to eat off of that plate? So Rosh Zalman Auerbach, he brings a proof from here, says that you can't, because just taking something out of the plate is considered using it. So they say like this, halach l'maisa, just to digress for a second about tevilas kelim, they say halach l'maisa, if it's a liquid, then you shouldn't use it, because the liquid needs the kli in order to be there. That's for sure. Also, if it's something like fruit or nuts on a plate or something like that, where even without the plate they would just be sitting there on the table, they wouldn't be rolling around. So then the poskim who are lenient. Furthermore, just in general, even though I don't want to really get into this so much, but in general, Rosh Zalman Auerbach, as a Racha, was lenient. If it's a situation where I'm in somebody else's home, it's not my kelim. In other words, my own utensils that I have to bring to the mikvah, I'm not allowed to use at all, no matter what, not even once, even though that's a famous misconception. I'm not allowed to use my kelim even once before I bring them to the mikvah. But if I'm in somebody else's house, and it's his kelim or her kelim, right? I'm in someone's home, and they're serving me glass, juice in a glass. So Rosh Hashanah says an interesting thing. It's their mitzvah to do tefilas kelim. It's not my mitzvah. It's their chiyuv on their item. Now it's true. It's my prohibition for every Jew. You're not allowed to use a kli unless it was tovelt. But it's not my mitzvah. It's not my chiyuv to go ahead and tovel that kli. It's their mitzvah. So if I could prevail upon them and get them to do the mitzvah, so then that's fine. But if I can't get them to do the mitzvah, so then he holds that it's mutter. It's mutter for me to use that utensil. He brings various proofs of this, very interesting, but not for now. But anyway, that's halacha. Rosh Zalman says, you see from here that even serving from a utensil is considered to be using it, because taking something down off of a tree is also prohibited. Now, this comes up again. It comes up especially if you've got kids and they don't know this. They'll put something there, hang something up. There's a very famous story about the stipler. The very famous story that the stipler was mostly deaf. Chaim Kanievsky's father was mostly deaf, and he was a very big tzaddik. He refused to use a hearing aid during the week because he held that you weren't allowed to use hearing aids on Shabbos. It's a big shayla in halacha. Many poskim are lenient. Rosh Zalman Auerbach was lenient. But the Chazon Ish held you were not allowed to use. The Chazon Ish held and the stipler held that you're not allowed to use a hearing aid on Shabbos, and therefore he refused to use a hearing aid during the week because he didn't want to have it be worse on Shabbos. He didn't want it to be like all week he could hear people, and on Shabbos he doesn't, so he refused to do it all the time. But why was he deaf? So the story is like this: that when he was in the Russian army, everybody was drafted into the army back in those days, and when he was in the Russian army, they would do shifts of shmirah, of guard duty. And there was a guard post, and the Russian army was always very poor, and they didn't have coats and proper uniforms for all the people. So there was one coat that the guards would share, and it was the middle of the winter, and it was a through the night shift of guard duty, and so the guard who's on duty got the coat, who's in the booth, and then when the next person comes, so then he gets the coat. So when the stipler came to his shift, the guard who was there before him left early. He abandoned his post a little bit early, and he left the coat hanging on a tree. And it was Friday night, it was Shabbos night, and he refused to take the coat off of the tree, and he nearly, froze to death, and he went deaf as a result, partially deaf as a result of this, just because of this halacha, halacha midrabanan, which again, I think for you or me it would be mutter to do. In other words, the person is not mechuyev to get sick, and certainly not to lose their hearing, in order to not take something off of a tree. But I guess he felt that it was the right thing for him to do. But it's it was because of this halacha of not taking something off a tree. Now, the halacha is not only can I not lean something on a tree or put something on a tree or take something off of a tree, but even something that is attached to something attached to the tree is also a problem. So let me explain what that means. We've said until now, for me to hang on a branch is asur. For me to take a towel and put it on the branch or remove it from the branch is also asur. But now, let's say I have a hook screwed into that branch, right? Like let's just take a hook. I have a hook that's screwed into that branch. So the halacha is I'm not allowed to put anything on or off of that hook either, right? That's also prohibited. Not only is the tree itself, but even what they call tzidei ha'ilan, which is the side pieces of the tree, which means something that's in the tree. Not only that, I even the coat, let's say the towel itself that's there. Well, no, it's not only that. So let's take it back. Let's take a coat. Let's say a coat is hanging on the hook on the tree. To take something in and out of the pocket of that coat would be permissible to do, right? In other words, something hanging on the tree, I can't do. Something hanging on something on the tree, I can't do. But to go in and out of the pocket of a coat that's hanging on a hook, that's hanging on the tree, that is permissible. Okay, now, that doesn't come up so often, but what does come up often, or often enough, are swings, right? A swing that's attached to a tree. So a swing on a tree can potentially be problematic. Now, first of all, we have to understand that a chain we see as one thing. In other words, we don't just say that just the chain that's on the tree is the thing that's on the tree, and then the next link in the chain is like the next one. So the chain is like a rope, it's seen as one thing. So let's just make this clear. So again, if I have a rope or a chain hanging from a tree, so for me to hold on to that rope and swing, that would be asur to do. I'm hanging on the tree. But if that rope is now attached to a tire, right, or if I've got two ropes that are attached to a swing, right, so then that swing would be permissible to sit on, right? The swing would be permissible to I wouldn't be able to take the swing on and off on Shabbos, right? But the swing would be permissible to use. So this is just something, if a person has a swing in their backyard or a hammock, this can also come up with. If you have a hammock, so if the hammock is tied to the tree itself, right, so then that's a problem. If you've got like a rope around the tree, and then there's a hook that the hammock hooks onto that rope, so then you would be allowed to sit on that hammock on Shabbos. But something that's hanging on the hook that's on the tree, would not be permissible to do. Same thing like a ladder. Let's say a ladder leaning up against the tree. The rungs of the ladder are all considered one. That's not considered two pieces. It has to be like two different things that are separated. So the question I didn't see anybody speak about, but I would assume it would be a problem. Let's say you would have a tire swing. While sitting in the swing would be mutter, but I don't think it would be mutter to hold on to the rope. You know what I mean? So I think the only way that would be mutter to have a tire swing would be if you would have like a hook in the tree, and then the rope hanging on that hook, and then I'm sitting on the tire, right? And then that way the tire is mutter, and holding on to that rope is mutter. But so that's so I don't know. I don't know how people if people have tire swings like that on Shabbos, but that's the way it should be done. You're not allowed to to do anything on or off of that. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that comes up with this as far as the trees? Like I said, if a ball or a hat happened, the shaila is discussed in the poskim. A person's walking to shul on Shabbos, a man, and their talus gets caught in a branch. Like a little bit of wind catches them, and the talus gets caught away in the branch. So again, the Sefer quote, the Nishmas Shabbos, he said that lichatchila, if you can get a non-Jewish person to take it off, then that would be better. If not, if he can't go without the talus for the Shabbos, then he said, since it was put up there like bibis asek, it was put up there. It wasn't like placed there intentionally, so it wasn't like meaning to be there, so maybe it's not counted as being hanacha there, like it's not really there, but l'maisa, it's really better to leave it if you can, and certainly if we're talking about a ball or something like that, for the children's toys, it's certainly better to leave it there, if you can avoid taking it down. Okay, and that's as far as climbing on a tree, leaning on a tree, putting stuff on and off of a tree is concerned. I think that's basically the halachos. Good. Anything? Okay. So now I want to just talk about now the idea of muktzah when it comes to trees and branches of a tree and then grass and all that things that are connected. So just a basic overview, just to make sure that we understand what we're talking about here. So the halachos of muktzah are a set of gzeiros midrabanan that were enacted by Chazal on Shabbos. That limit our ability to move and use things on Shabbos. It's a whole set of halachos called muktzah or klish malachta le'iser. It's a separate and related halachos, right? But it's a whole set of things that we're not allowed to move and use on Shabbos. Now, there's a very common misconception when it comes to halachos of muktzah, which is a confusion of two halachos, but I just want to make sure this is clear before I explain get into the rest of the halachos. That is as follows: there's two different categories of muktzah. There's muktzah mamish, like muktzah, and then there's the category of a klish malachta le'iser, utensils that I'm not allowed to use on Shabbos, like a hammer or a saw or a cell phone or something like that. But the halachos of muktzah and klish malachta le'iser are different. Most centrally in the fact that a klish malachta le'iser, it's utensil, it's a keli, it's something that's a man-made object. It's just something that I'm not allowed to use on Shabbos. So Chazal said I'm not allowed to move it, I'm not allowed to use it, I'm not allowed to move it even for its own protection. But if I need the place it occupies, or if I need to use it for a permissible purpose, right? The most famous example, to use a hammer to crack open nuts, right? So that's mutter to do. Klish malachta le'iser, which is again, it's a utensil, a man-made item, a man-designated, man-made item that has a use. It's just on Shabbos that use is prohibited. So I'm not allowed to move that thing stam. I'm not allowed to move it to protect it if it's going to get ruined out in the rain. I can't bring my hammer inside. But if the hammer is sitting on my chair and I want to sit down, or if the hammer is available and I want to crack open a walnut, I'm allowed to move that hammer. That is only when it comes to the halachas of klish malachta le'iser. When it comes to muktzah mamish, when it comes to something that is muktzah because it's not a kli, it's a non-utensil item, a rock, a stick, a stone, anything like that, leaves, branches, all of these things, that is muktzah mamish, and then there's no heter to move that at all. You can't move it not for a use, not because you need the place that it occupies, not because certain ways you can move it in an indirect way, etc., which we'll speak about soon. But I just want to make that distinction clear because sometimes people have this idea confused. Sometimes anyway, people have the whole idea of muktzah confused. People sometimes use the word muktzah in a much more general way on Shabbos. They'll say, "Is it muktzah to cook that on Shabbos or something?" You ever heard that? People do that. I heard that, like Americans have that a lot. They'll say, "You heard that?" They say, "Is it muktzah to plug that in on Shabbos or something?" It's just like misunderstanding of the term. But we even within the real halachos of muktzah itself, so there's a difference between muktzah mamish, right? Muktzah, real muktzah, and a klish malachta le'iser. Again, a klish malachta le'iser, there are ways and times I'm allowed to move it, whereas muktzah mamish, I may never directly move it with my hands, except in emergencies, etc. Okay, now. With that understood, so let's address the halachos of muktzah when it comes to things that are attached to the ground. Right? Our trees, branches, grass, and all of these things, muktzah. So just to make sure, what does it mean? What are we talking about here? Let's just give a few different examples. Let's say, we're sitting outside. I'm sitting on the. Well, first of all, can I sit on the grass? Right? Is that okay to do? Am I allowed to sit on the grass? And if we're sitting on the grass, am I allowed to run my hands through the blades of grass? Am I allowed to touch grass on Shabbos and play with the grass on Shabbos? Now, again, certainly to pluck out the grass is for sure. So I have to be, whatever I'm doing, I have to be very careful that I'm not going to pluck out the grass, even when I'm walking, which we'll speak about maybe tonight, maybe next week. But I for sure can't do anything that's going to consciously, knowingly, for sure, pull out grass from the ground. But am I allowed to move my hand in the grass? Let's say there's tall grass. I'm allowed to move my hand in it. Or like we said before, if my hand is messy or got dirty, am I allowed to wipe it in the grass in order to wipe it off? Let's take another example. Let's say I'm walking and there's some branches that are obscuring my path, they're blocking my way. So am I allowed to, with my hand, right, take these branches that are connected to the ground? Let's just make this clear. If the branches would not be connected, there's no question, they're muktzah, right? In other words, if I'm walking on a path and there's a whole pile of dead branches in front of me, I'm not allowed to, again, disconnected, I'm not allowed to pick them up and move them with my hands. They're muktzah. I may be able to move them with my feet or whatever, different things, but I wouldn't be able to move them. The question is something that is connected to the ground, is that considered to be muktzah? If I have these overgrown path, am I allowed to push these things out of the way with my hand? Or like we said before, let's say a ball or a frisbee gets stuck in a bush low down, within the first 3 tefachim. So am I allowed to reach in there and move things out of the way in order to go in there and get it? So what's interesting about this halacha is that it says in the Shulchan Aruch that this is mutter to do. It says the whole sim in Shulchan Aruch, they used to use the grass for cleaning themselves. They used to use it for kinuach. It was like a normal thing. It was like a regular thing that grass was used for cleaning purposes all the time, and therefore it says in the Shulchan Aruch you're allowed to do all these things because that was normal. Halacha l'maisa, though, the poskim will all say that nowadays that's not the case. Since nowadays nobody uses the grass, it's not a normal thing for people to use the grass. Certainly not like understood and accepted, and that everybody realizes that the grass is like set aside for cleaning. So the poskim say halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, and nowadays that we treat the grass like muktzah. And you really should avoid moving it directly with your hand. Like in other words, you're saying, you're sitting on the ground to move your hand, through the grass, or to move things like that. And certainly detached grass is also muktzah. Let's say your kids were playing outside and there's grass on their shoes or grass in their toes that the Mishnah Berurah speaks about, picking grass from between a person's toes. He says you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos because when he speaks about the heter to walk on grass, even though it may rip out, which we'll speak about, but he says you have to make sure that afterwards that you don't pick out the grass because the grass becomes muktzah afterwards. So halacha l'maisa, the poskim say that you should not move it with your hand. To sit on grass and walk on grass and lean on grass, and even to push yourself up off the grass with your hand, right? Which is funny because you're still using it, but that type of a hishtamshus, that type of a use of pushing down on the grass, that we do with the grass. But wiping our hands on grass or using it for anything like that, also not. And likewise, the poskim say when it comes to moving branches out of the way, if there's, like I said, I'm walking on a path or something, or there's branches that are there, so branches that are connected to a tree, I have to treat them as muktzah. And therefore, the halacha is when it comes to muktzah, I'm allowed to move it in an indirect way, either with another object. Let's say if I have a broom or something, so I'm allowed to push the branches out of there with a broom in order to let me get by. Or I'm allowed to do it within an unusual part of my body. Let's say Rav Moshe Feinstein says from the elbow and up. So if there's branches in the way, and when a person is walking, so they should push them out of the way with their elbows, and try not to do what kind of comes naturally to us, which is just to clear the way away with our hands, and push things this way and that way to the side. Definitely preferable to treat grass that way. Grass and branches and those types of things as muktzah with your hands and not to move them directly like that. Okay.
That's talking about branches that are still attached to the tree. Yeah.
It's still attached, yeah. So basically it comes out that both ways that it's muktzah. The only reason I guess I set it up that way just in the beginning is because in the Shulchan Aruch it makes a big difference about the grass that's connected or not. But I'm saying practically speaking, for us nowadays, it makes a difference. Okay. Okay, that's hopefully we'll speak on maybe next week the idea of separation. So I'll just address a few other things that come up when we're outside. I'll address. There's one thing I want to say about the tree. Going back to the trees just for a second. I forgot to mention this. Just back to the tree about attaching things and putting things and taking things on and off. So there's another halacha that a lot of people are really not so familiar with on Shabbos. That comes up. Actually, this also comes up in the summertime quite a bit. And that's the halacha of binyan, of constructing on Shabbos, of binyan and stira, which is deconstructing, undoing something. And the halacha is like this: that anything that is attached to the ground, or even if it's not attached to the ground, but it's very large, which I'll explain in a second. But anything that is attached to the ground, is subject to the malacha of binyan if I put something onto it, attach something to it, or the malacha of stira, of destroying, if I remove something from it. So to attach something to a tree, like in a permanent way, even if it's not permanent. Let me take it back. To attach something to a tree for long term, even if it's not attached in a permanent way, is not allowed to be done on Shabbos. So, for example, let's say you have. Let's just make the case very clear. I have a tree, and then in the tree I have a hook. Connected to that hook, I have a rope, and connected to that rope, I have a tire swing. Okay, so that swing I'm allowed to swing on, and not only that, if that tire would break off of the swing on Shabbos for whatever reason, let's say the rope would get untied and the tire would fall, it would be permissible to reattach the tire to the rope on Shabbos because the rope is connected to the hook, which is connected to the tree. Right, that's like the clothing on the hook on the tree that I could take something in and out of the pocket. So I'd be allowed to attach or reattach that tire as far as the halachos of the tree are concerned. However, if it's the type of a tire that is going to be stuck there for permanently, even though I'm not attaching it permanently, even though, and I'll make this clear because there's a lot of halachos that come up like this in the house, even if I'm just like putting it onto hooks, but if the idea is for it to stay there and to remain there forever, then it could be a very serious shaila of bona, right? Of not having this gzeira d'rabbanan of using a tree, but of construction. And I want to just explain this because this is something that comes up in the house. As we said before, anything that's connected to the ground, or even a kli, even a utensil, if it's so large that it's the size of a mikvah, which means that it holds mem sa, that it holds 40 sa, which means that it's basically 1 amma by 1 amma by 3 amos, which is like a big bookshelf would qualify for this. Let's say a big bookshelf, halach l'maisa, if that would be built into the ground, that would be enough water for a mikvah, probably. Let's say a very big bookshelf. Certainly like a double bookshelf. So anything like that is also subject to the halacha of bona. In other words, it's once it's so big, it doesn't have the halacha of a kli anymore. Right? A car or something like that is already probably. Okay. So when it comes to anything that is subject to the halacha of bona, you are not allowed to be mevatel something to a binyan. Mevatel something to a binyan means leave something to remain a part of it. I'm saying this very specifically. I'm not using any word like attached or connected because it doesn't have to be attached or connected. For example, let's say you've got a big Persian rug in your living room, and that's where it stays. It's just there all the time. To remove and replace that Persian rug on Shabbos is a question of an isur d'oraisa of bona. Since it's like it's not like a mat that moves around, right? That's what we're talking about. No matter a rug that stays there and is there all the time. Let's say a drop ceiling tile, right? You know what a drop ceiling is? I don't have them so much here in Israel, but you know what that is? The ceiling. Yeah. So a drop ceiling is not connected in any way. It's not bolted. It's not fastened in any way. You just touch it and it pops up. So to remove a drop ceiling tile on Shabbos is a daraisa. That's a stirim in HaTorah. And somebody, I was once somewhere where they did this. It was a shul, and it was very hot, and they didn't have the air conditioning wasn't on, and they had a drop ceiling. And when you remove the tile, so it lets the hot air up and it cools it off. And somebody started doing that on Shabbos, and the Rav said, "No, you have to stop. It's mamish, a question of steer deraisa." I'll give you another example: putting a bookshelf on, right? Even if you're not installing it with screws or anything, but just taking a bookshelf. That again, the part of a big bookcase that's meant to stay there for a long term, or a shelf in a fridge or anything like that. That's meant to. So that's bona min Torah. It's a very thing that people are not aware of, even if it's a small thing. And it comes up also, let's say by a screen door or a screen window or something that says that pops out of the frame. So if it's a type of thing that is constantly popping in and popping out. Let's say that's so even that's still a shaila. But let's say there's room to be mako. But let's say just on Shabbos. As you were opening your window, or you just tried to open your screen for some reason, and because the screen is kind of like jittery, you haven't opened it in a while, and it pops out of the frame, it's mamash asur min Torah to pop it back into the frame on Shabbos. And it's something people don't realize, and you kind of just do it, kalach hayad, you do it very, offhandedly, and you have to be careful to do that. And I'm saying the same thing applies outside also when it comes to trees. If you're going to attach something to a tree, leave it to a tree. And leave it attached also, so you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that Shabbos either.
So the big object you were talking about that you're attaching something to would be the house. Where did that come in? Because the screen.
No, the book or the bookshelf. Yeah, the house or the bookshelf. A house is for sure kavua to the karka.
Okay. Okay.
So that's going to be binyan. But even in a big bookshelf, just taking a shelf and putting it in there to stay there, that's going to be
because the
boner.
bookshelf is big enough to be considered.
To be that right. I'll tell you something. The Chazon Ish held that. I don't think most poskim say it like this, but the Chazon Ish held that even putting a picture up on the wall. Let's say you have a picture on that came off of the wall,
Right.
and you're putting it there. So there the poskim are more lenient, and I think most poskim are makel and not like the Chazon Ish, because it's not meant to be a part of the wall, right? I mean, it's a kishut. It's a decoration. It's not meant to be constructed and attached to the wall. As opposed to a rug, even though it's just sitting there, but the rug is meant to be a part of the house. It's meant to be the carpeting for this room, so that's considered to be a big component.
In terms of using a tree, what if you had a tree house? Like you had a tree
So you can't use a tree house on Shabbos. There's the whole sugya in Gemara Sukkah about a sukkah that's up in a tree. You can't use it on Yantif. You can't use it on Yantif. You can't just to climb up on the ladder is also to do. We had a tree house growing up. You're not allowed to use it on Shabbos.
When it comes to a picture, so I was told that it's muktzah, you're not allowed even to move it, you're not allowed even to straighten
So that's also a question of muktzah. There's two questions.
You can't even move it.
Well, there's two questions. There's two questions when it comes to a picture. The one question of muktzah machmas chisaron kis, which is there's a category of muktzah of something that it's valuable, so you set aside a place for it, and you that's where you keep it. So then it becomes muktzah. So there's some poskim who say that a painting like that becomes muktzah because of chisaron kis. There are those who are lenient because there's a big question in general whether a kli shemalachto leheter, right, something that it doesn't do a malacha, it doesn't do any aveira on Shabbos. So there are many who say that a kli shemalachto leheter can't become muktzah machmas chisaron kis, right? If you've got a very expensive kiddush cup, well, I could use my kiddush cup on Shabbos, right? So I can use this painting on Shabbos. I can show it to people. So even though I keep it in a special place, that there's a question about that. But the Chazon Ish is saying something that's even more strict. There's muktzah is an isur d'Rabbanan. According to the Chazon Ish, this would be an isur min Torah of bona. Right? So even if it could be both of them, it could be muktzah and bona. But that's okay. All right, we'll stop over here.